Welcome to episode 14 of Beneath the Grandstand. I'm Ryan Fenton here with Alex Lohr, and excited to be back for another episode this week, and appreciate everyone that's been tuning in along the way. If you guys are enjoying the show, love to hear your comments, your reviews, like, subscribe. Check us out on all the podcast platforms, also video version on FlowTrack. So again, appreciate you tuning in, and here we go, episode 14, Alex. Really, today starts off with a lot of just news, a lot of craziness. I mean, every week we're still in that what's going to happen this week mode, and now the college decisions around the decisions around college sports are starting to be made. The Ivy League, who we saw was one of the leaders in decisions during the winter season around canceling sports and not having athletes go to competition, is now announced they will postpone all fall sports for the semester and through really January 1st. So we don't know what that means yet. If that means their fall sports could be repositioned in the spring, we just know they're not happening between now and January 1st of 2021. Other news, Stanford just cut 11 sports programs, which was a huge blow to a number of Olympic sports that Stanford has funded and been competitive in for a number of years. The ACC announced a smaller delay than the Ivy League, but the sports will be delayed and starting till September 1st. The Big Ten has announced only conference games through the fall for their sports. And then some Division II conferences recently announced their fall sports will not happen with the CIAA and the SIAC conferences. So, Alex, it feels it's a little bit of an uneasy feeling. It feels like the dominoes are starting to fall in the way of a lot of sports not happening this fall.
Isn't it interesting too? Because we were, I feel like we just recently, it felt like there were glimmers of hope, like MLS is kicking off, NBA is going to kick off, all these things, all these sports are going to happen, right? And we were just talking about that, but we still continue to see on the collegiate side of things going a different trajectory, right? And I think I wonder what that influence will be, right? You think it would come from the top down, that if things are going to get green light, you would think that the next tiers would be able to green light as well, but it's kind of flipped. And I wonder, you have to wonder if this kind of Ivy League domino might influence up, right? Because we saw that this winter. The Ivy League was basically the first conference to nix sports, and everything kind of tumbled after that. So I'm really interested to see the kind of ripple effects that this has. I think it's scary that it's conference by conference. And there's some ADs in some super difficult situations right now. And so as we've kind of wondered, are we at the end of this thing, or is this kind of machine in this kind of hallway just beginning? And it looks like it's still going on, Ryan, and there's not quite a light at the end of the tunnel, unfortunately, just yet.
No, I mean, you still do have some conferences saying that, hey, we're trying to have a season, right? The Big Ten obviously changing what the season will look like, and other conferences, particularly Power Five, that are have been trying to figure out how to have football. The difference between a college football and an NFL or another pro league is, what does it mean to have sports but not have kids on campus, or kids on campus, right? And so that's a whole nother element to this. There's some immigration regulations that have been put in place that now put kids, foreign kids at risk of having to leave the country if they can't be at an in-person class. And so that obviously doesn't just affect the athletes that are from foreign nations. It affects every student at these universities. So much is up in the air, and in some ways, I'm glad I'm not on an administration having to make these decisions right now, because it's just so much to go through. But for this week, we felt like we wanted to get some perspective from someone who not only was a college athlete, but was a college athlete in the conference that's, again, leading the charge in a lot of ways in coming out with their decisions first in the Ivy League. Kyle Merber has been an athlete I think that a lot of folks have grown to know and enjoy hearing from over the years. He was 4 years at Columbia, won 10 Ivy League titles individually and with his team over his years. American collegiate record holder for 1,500 meters. Asterisk question mark. Maybe we'll ask him about that. Currently running for Hoka and New Jersey, New York Track Club with Coach Gags, and was a gold medalist in the World Relays a number of years ago with the DMR. So ton of perspective, even as a meet director. So let's call this man onto the show. Kyle Merber joins us now from. Kyle, I'll let you tell us where you're coming in hot from, but welcome to the show for the first time, and great to see you. How are things? And again, where are you at?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I am in Hastings-on-Hudson, New York, which it's just outside the city. I always describe it as you can see the skyline, but you're not in the skyline.
I was letting you introduce that because when you told me that earlier, it sounded like a restaurant, and I didn't know if that was actually. I literally Googled it just to make sure it was an actual city, and I was like, "Is he at social distancing at a club on the river?"
We have restaurants on the river, believe it or not, but it's close enough that it's a regular discussion of whether or not it would be worth getting jet skis to try to ride down to the city or not. We just don't know if the jet skis have the ability to go there and get us back. And that's something that we're looking into.
Carry the gas tank.
Yeah. Nice. Sounds safe.
Nice. Merber, we were putting a little intro together for you, and the debate came up. Is Kyle Merber the collegiate American record holder in the 1,500?
By the book, yes. Would I argue I am the fastest American collegiate of all time? I would probably say no.
So who would?
That's
who
just
would
me being humble. Robbie was still in college when he ran 3:34 at Oxy in 2012, and then Centro, I think, was was he technically out of college at that point? It was his senior season. I don't know.
It was
but I would say definitely
season,
Robbie.
Yeah, and then I mean, we're talking about by the book, and it was there was one thing I saw that was Kyle Merber is the American collegiate record holder, and then literally on the same page, they also listed Jim Ryan. So I was like,
yeah. So I'm just happy to be in the discussion.
Yeah.
Well, listen, I saw on the list that there was one list that I've seen, and it was Track and Field News that had you. So that is, I think, is the Bible of the sport, if I'm not mistaken. So.
Yeah. I mean, look, does it say it on my resume? Of course. So that's where it counts.
Well,
I think some people draw the line at jerseys, right? I think because Robbie was wearing the white with the white wife beater at Oxy. So if you're wearing the collegiate singlet, I think that's a key factor on whether people will give you the thumbs up or not.
Yeah. So to those people, I thank you for your support.
Well, Kyle, we're excited to have you on. There's obviously sports. The worlds that we are in has been, dramatically affected by the pandemic, and so many different levels. I'm sure you personally have obviously had to deal with it in terms of what does racing look like, what does training look like, what does my sponsorships look like, all these things. But one of the recent happenings that we thought probably hits home for you quite a bit is what's going on in the Ivy League. First, with the cutting of sports programs, the Ivy League made some news with Brown cutting men's track and field and cross country, which was obviously reinstated. But then yesterday, the Ivy League announced that fall sports would be essentially on pause or postponed, and no sports would take place between now and January 1st. So first off, they're one of the first Division I conferences to come out with that kind of news. So I'm curious to know where you were when you heard the news, and what was your reaction and feelings to that.
Yeah, I would say initially not surprised at all, especially once it was determined, I think a couple days before, that all of the Ivy League schools, more or less, or at least a few of them, determined that they weren't even going to have kids on campus during the first semester of the upcoming year. So that, was really the writing on the wall. And also, I mean, Harvard was the first one to do it indoors, like right before the NCAA. And I think everyone panicked and were angry, and rightfully so, but they really nailed it. Got to give them credit. They set the trend of canceling that followed the next few days. And so, I wouldn't be surprised if it's just going to be across the board what everything's happening in the following week or two.
Kyle, I'm curious, we've seen Harvard make the decision early, right? Back before indoors. And then, so all conferences, let's assume they're operating off of the same basis of information and data here, right? Why is it that the Ivy League, though, what is the lens and insight that the Ivy League has that is pushing it to make this decision before all the other major conferences?
Yeah, so I think that there's a couple huge things in play. I think first off, it's just the progressive and liberal nature that does exist, that environment in the Ivy League school. You're just not going to get any political pushback like you would maybe in some of the other major Power 5 conference schools. So that's certainly an element where you have a little bit more freedom to do it, because I think that is the environment and the culture of the students and the professors and the coaches and whatnot. It's obviously a little bit more liberal leaning. So I think that's definitely one part of it. And then another thing is the Ivy League is not dependent on football or basketball to make money. If anything, it's costing them tremendous amounts of money. So the financial incentives to hold off on making a decision, or maybe potentially making a dangerous decision, kind of don't exist, go out the window. So again, it just gives them a little bit more liberty to do what they believe is the right thing, as opposed to doing what everyone wishes was the thing that's happening.
What's it been like in terms of, folks that that are still, associated, whether coaches or athletes at the Ivy League level, or alumni, former teammates of yours? Are people talking and communicating, and if so, what's the sentiment out there?
Yeah, it's no one's shocked is the thing. I think the question is then just what would you do if you were an athlete? And on the topic of Brown, this was a big discussion that I had with a bunch of my former college teammates of, if this had happened our sophomore, junior year where our program got canceled, what would you have done? And would you transfer away, or would you take years off and then use your 6 years somewhere else, or what? And I think that's now the bigger question is, theoretically, if I had been born 10 years later, what would I do? And I think you're going to see a lot of, especially the good, guys who really have some long-term potential in the sport. I think that you're going to see people just take a gap year off from school, which I would have done anyway if they would have said, you're going to be remote learning for an entire year. That's not the college experience that you want to pay $60,000 a year for.
Yeah, that's one question I wanted to try to dig in with you. I mean, one of the things that I was looking at when this news came out is they had a FAQ for student athletes in the Ivy League, and what does this all mean? And the fifth year for most of us that are non-Ivy Leaguers, going through school, is that, Ivy League kids, student athletes don't get a fifth year. They have to take that elsewhere, right? And so in reading through some of the information, it seems like some of that still holds true if you're but there is some exception for a fifth year approval, but you still have to be an undergraduate. So I was just curious if you could help explain what it means to try to get a fifth year at an Ivy League, and how would that still allow you to compete?
So the thing in the Ivy League is basically that they want you to be a student first, and they don't want you to be making your academic decisions based off of athletic like situations and choices or injuries and that. And so for that reason, you have to be an undergraduate in order to compete in the Ivy League. And there are some workarounds like gap years, or you can take a semester off and come back and get that extended as long as you're still in your undergrad. Another thing that we had some athletes do was like at Columbia, there's a 3-2 program, which is basically like you get a double degree. And so you're getting your undergrad over the course of 5 years. So that's one workaround. You'd have to be pretty damn smart and good at school to get accepted into that program. But for some people, that was an option. And so that's like the general like rule, and like the mindset is that it's academics first. I know personally, when I got hurt going into my junior year, I thought I was going to be able to compete that year. And so it never really crossed my mind to take a gap year or take a year off or something. And after missing cross country, indoor, outdoor 3 seasons in a row, I remember sitting there being like, man, if I had known, I would have definitely taken the entire year off. So that way I'd be able to come back.
So are you saying you can make the gap year is a decision you can make to have a 5th year to compete, but you have to do it not because of an athletic situation? Or how can you kind of play out the scenario? Like, and use yours for an example. Like, how could the gap year actually have been used?
Well, I mean, like not athletes, but students take gap years all the time. And, you know, for some people, it might be a mental health thing where they just, you know, after a couple of years in college, they really feel like they need a semester off. And students do this all the time, especially with like such rigorous academic schedules. And so maybe you take the semester off for personal reasons, and then you come back, and now all of a sudden it's like that eligibility still exists. So there's some workarounds. I think there might be some level of like medical proof maybe necessary, but it's been done, and you can get creative for sure. And so, I'm not an expert. I'm just
but athletic.
I just know what some
injury
people
doesn't. I was going to say an athletic injury would not constitute a gap year.
It could. I mean, if you lined it up well, like, you know, if you got injured during the summer, you could be like, you know what, I'm going to actually take this semester off. But then you're not on campus at all, and you'd be at home, and it'd be a full-on gap year. Maybe you travel Europe or something, and then you come back. Mm-hmm. But you just have to be an undergrad.
Got it. And that's mm-hmm. So in that scenario, it happened during the summer while school wasn't in session, so you weren't enrolled yet into that semester.
Yeah, but I thought I was going to be healthy, so
yeah,
I still, you know, I thought I would get back in time and everything. So being the optimist that I am, I still proceeded and stuck to the schedule, and yada yada yada. Never got healthy, and then had to take my 5th year elsewhere.
Got it.
Now, what would you guys do, just out of curiosity? Because, like, if you guys were in college, let's say, Fenton, you seem like you'd be like a Yaley, and Alex, maybe like a Dartmouth guy. I don't know. Like, what would you guys do if you were, let's say, you just finished your sophomore year and you both ran 3:59 in the mile? What would you do?
I like how Kyle just took over this podcast. This is good.
I just want to thank you guys for joining me on my podcast. So anyway.
And so the question is, if after our sophomore year, we knew our season was canceled?
Yeah. So if you just finished your sophomore year, you did well. Let's say you just broke 4 minutes of the mile for the first time. Like, I wouldn't hold it against anyone for taking a year off.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because
right. Well, like, I mean,
I was gonna say it's interesting because this question is interesting because I look at this in 2 ways, right? How would I have answered this as an athlete, and how would I have, you know, in the moment, and how would I answer it now as an adult, who was an athlete years ago and thinking the way I think now, right? And now one of the things that I think about is I look at friends that were able to do some things outside of school that I wasn't able to do. And so there's part of me that's like, man, there's things I know now that maybe I would have taken advantage of and whatever that may be in terms of work experience or travel or whatever. So maybe that would be an opportunity. In the moment as an athlete, when I look at myself in college, I first off would have been confused, not probably know what to do. But I wanted to run. I wanted to be at my university. I loved going to Clemson. But even if I was on campus, what part of the thing I loved about Clemson, especially in the fall, was football. So if there's no cross country and there's no football, what is the fall semester going to look like? And so,
and then Ryan, an interesting thing to think about, which is if other schools begin to cancel their like fall seasons and you're not on campus, what do scholarships look like? Do you still get an athletic scholarship that year if there's no sports?
Yeah, well, I mean, fortunately for me in that decision as a sophomore, I didn't have a scholarship yet, so it would have been.
Yeah, but you just ran 3:59.
This is true. Yeah, I don't know, Alex. If you maybe you have some thoughts on where you would be in this situation.
Well, I would think it'd be like my decision would be heavily based on my teammates, right? Like if we were all like, a lot of times you have this for like, hey, this year in 2 seasons we're gonna be freaking amazing, right? And so I think you think you're gonna win NCAAs in 2 years. All the stars are gonna align. So I think I'd be heavily influenced by what my teammates are doing. But because of that, like if I was I was such a hardcore like XC team nerd. Like if I was a 359 guy, you better be like, I would absolutely be like looking around a little bit and seeing if my services would be like if I could land out of Colorado, who's like always in the team mix. Like I would absolutely put the feelers out there. What I think is an interesting like insight though, so like we talk about these gap years or these off years, like BYU does that already, right? And so we've seen like some of what that can do for you aerobically and like from a recovery standpoint. Like I think let's look at some of the distance kids in the Ivy League right now. They have not run a championship. They haven't stepped on the track for a race since before HEPS, right? So, when we typically look at the cross country season, it's like a weird war of attrition, right? It's like every time we interview a coach, it's like, this person's banged up, hopefully this person can finish. But now we have like 3 seasons of like aerobic base that people have been building. And I've been wondering how this is going to like affect overall performances, right? Because you could see some programs just like embracing this and like going to the well as far as like mileage and aerobic base and like you can like recover and be healthy. Like I wonder which direction like these few seasons off is going to take us. Like you could argue that people are going to run super, super fast and there's going to be a bunch of collegians running whatever sub 13:30 in the 5K. Or you could argue like, hey, everyone's going to be super rusty because no one's raced in months and months and months and times are going to be super slow, right? So I'm really interested in which direction it's going to go. I don't know what, like Merber, like you've had this uninterrupted, months and months of training without a race on your calendar. Like, has your perspective of aerobic base changed?
Yeah, well, it's kind of incredible what you can do when you're not trying to get race ready. You can just like if you go on Strava and you see what the whole world is doing, I feel like everyone's been way healthier than they normally would be. Because you're not,
totally.
The places where you really get hurt is spiking up and running race pace. It's not necessarily the long, slow miles. And so people are healthy right now. And I think what I would do, and it seems to be that a lot of college kids are sort of doing this. I don't know what's going on out in Boulder, Colorado right now, but I feel like there's a million kids out there just training hard from all different schools together. And I think that's the move. Like just with your teammates, just like, guys, let's all just go train together for the entire year. Like we'll get a house, I don't know, maybe in Acadia National Park in Maine or something, and
Boom.
just run some miles
God.
and get strong as hell. And then when this whole thing is over, be ready to go. But I think in the immediate, I remember having conversations with teammates about during the pandemic, like Johnny was saying, like, I think people are going to run really, really fast when this is all over. And I was kind of like, yeah, I think they're going to run slow this year, and then next year is going to be insane. Is sort of my prediction. Like, I don't think we're going to see anything. I mean, Jakob is, holding up to showing everyone what's possible right now. He's still racing quite well, but I think aside from that, we're not going to see any superhero performances for the most part. And then next year, I think will be wild.
We'll see what Bowerman has to say about that tomorrow, I guess. So
yeah, that's true.
So one where Alex, when you brought up just the point about kind of diehard college team guy, I think all of us that ran cross country kind of had that mindset of and I think it was a good point. A lot of it will depend on what's our team going to do. And my mind went to where you went, Merber, in terms of, hey, do we normally be paying rent or some kind of housing wherever we would be this year that we can't be? Do we just go together and kind of self-quarantine, do some altitude training, which we never get to do, and come out of this thing the fittest group of 7 or 10 or whatever the number is that we've ever been, and get ready. So it's interesting. And I've heard some whispers of some of those thoughts already. There's some schools that are already kind of putting out there that if college campuses are accepting kids on campus again, athletes may not be allowed to go in person and they may have to take online classes. And if so, and they can't be in class, can we go train somewhere and take the online classes, right? And so there's already some of this happening right now. And you guys did that.
Well,
I remember you brought up Arcadia. You guys did that in the summer together.
Yeah. Well, it got me thinking more about the Ivy League thing, where I don't think parents are going to want to pay for their kids' education, or like people are going to want to take out student loans to sit at home and take classes online. Like the college experience is not just the slides that you're taking or like looking at your class. Like, it's the whole being on campus and meeting people and interacting with people from all over the world. And that then brings in a whole nother element of what's happening with the international visas right now. A lot of international athletes, obviously, in the NCAA are required to take an online or an in-person class in order to like maintain their status of residence in the United States. And so now the whole thing is people or universities are scrambling to create an in-person class for their international students.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. Like, Fenton, when you started to talk about, athletes wouldn't be allowed to come onto campus, and that, like, it's interesting from a perspective of like, hey, if you have the means or the situation to allow yourself to be on campus, you could see that as an advantage as an athlete, right? Because you have access to X, Y, Z, right? But on the flip side, as distance runners, like, we probably look at it through a different view. Like, if a high jumper or a pole vaulter wants to be on campus because they have the facilities, right? But as distance runners, we're like, well, hey, it's not fair that he has the means to go live in Boulder for the summer or the fall, right? And you can just afford an Airbnb or whatever, like, so there's two different like tiers of privilege there. If you can be on campus, or if you can afford to be off campus and seek better situation, right? So it's like, I can see how they have to draw the line there and say, like, if you're an athlete, you can't be on campus. It's really interesting. What I was also thinking about was, like, I remember when Jared Ward, he started to train, he was training for like the Chicago Marathon, right? In the middle of his senior year. So like he basically didn't run any cross races, but he ran the Chicago Marathon, ran super solid, and then he just showed up to NCAAs, right? I wonder if there's like, is there a situation where we like all the cross kids who have these big gigantic bases that they've been working on for the last 6 months at this point, like, what if we put them in a half marathon time trial, right? Right before Thanksgiving, everybody runs a half marathon time trial, and all of a sudden we have, 40 kids who just qualified for the next marathon trials to have that ticket already punched. I think that'd be pretty cool. Can we set up a system for these kids to pour their fitness into at some point? Just throwing out ideas.
I think we're going to see a lot of time trials that we're just going to hear about probably next year amongst all the college kids. If I was this is my new idea, is you hear about like these TikTok and Vine houses out in California of like 20 creators living in a house, just like churning out content. Like, runners should be doing that. Like, if I was a college kid, and I do know that I was referencing like some of the kids out in Boulder, like just making YouTube channels and like crushing it. And it's just like that, for the next year, just brand yourself. Someone should write a book about this crazy year in college, like a Running with the Buffaloes-esque book, except it's like running with 30 random kids who all like have no in-person college classes anymore. That's the name of the book.
Merber, I think I mean, I feel like you should be taking some of these ideas, training for the Olympics in the midst of a pandemic, right? I mean, gosh.
Yeah.
Someone's going to do it.
Here's
Might as well be you.
I came up with 2 minutes ago or 2 minutes before logging on to talk to you guys. In the beginning, I was like, oh no, like the Olympics is still going to happen. Like 2020 Olympics is still going on, like too much, whatever. But now I've kind of gone to the other side where I'm a real doomsdayer. And so now, what do you think is the possibility that the Olympics happen and like the United States and other countries that don't have it under control aren't invited?
Are not invited.
Is that a world? Did I make that up? Has anyone talked about this?
Well, so no, I think that's actually a good point, and I don't know where the IOC would sit on that conversation. I think that's a good question. I know that world exists because we're in the state of Texas right now. You in New York, Kyle, aren't as welcoming to Texans at the moment due to our flare up of cases, and
the tables have turned.
so I say that jokingly, but Maine took that stance months ago. We were planning our wedding, my fiance and I, and had to cancel it because out of state people had to self quarantine for 2 weeks upon entering. So this world does exist already, right? In some way. Could it go to the Olympic level? I mean, if the United States is surging with cases so much more than any other country that they're not invited to the Olympics, we probably have much bigger problems than if we're going to compete at the games. So hopefully we don't reach that point. But I would, based on everything that's going on in sports right now, I would have to think that all discussions are on the table, all ideas, all opportunity, all possibilities, because for everybody, for the economics of everyone's business, you have to consider all options at this point, and what ifs. So I think it's a really interesting question. I would be surprised if those conversations haven't already started at the IOC level.
I think it's interesting that we're in a place right now where literally 10 days ago, we were seeing the release of the MLB schedule and the NBA schedule, right? So it's like every 10 days we flip discussions where it's like, we are going to make sports happen. But now 10 days later, it's the complete opposite, like dominoes are falling where sports aren't happening, right? And it's like, and again, like you talk about, like, is there a scenario where, the U.S. doesn't go to the Olympics? Is there a scenario where like HEPS never, like, doesn't return to athletics? Like, I guess what I feel like we need to zero in on is what is the metric we're comfortable with, right? So it's like, when are we comfortable competing? Like, can we all come to a universal, like, tool where we accept that it's safe to go out again? So, like, if it's, I've heard people say, schools are like, we're not going to go back to school until each county has had no COVID cases for 14 days. Right. And It's like, is that the metric? I don't know. Like Kyle, for the Ivy Leagues, like, what is their specific metric that they could start justifying having sports? Because they haven't justified having sports since March. Are they going to look at that? That's going to say, oh, now we can go.
I think a lot of it is just outside pressure even. And it's just like, if anyone is saying, if your detractors are saying you're doing something that's not safe, then that's going to be an issue. Like just the way people are viewing the way the governing bodies are handling it, and what's your liability. And I think you even see it now with some of the time trials and some of the meets that are happening in professional running. A lot of it is optics, like we got COVID tests. Everyone got COVID tests, and like where everyone's wearing masks and we're only allowed a few people, and then it's like, before you can give the results, you have to say like 8 things you did to prove why it was safe for you to do. And it's like, we everyone's training together and living together already. Like, so then to just have your team suddenly race, but to publish it or publicize it, you have to say all the precautions that you took. And I just feel like, is that legitimately anything beyond just proving that you're sensitive to what's going on? And I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm saying like it's
right.
It's the right thing to do, but it I don't know.
I talked about this with a few meet directors that are trying to put on events. And I think part of this challenge is that for your event to count, right, there has to be some kind of USATF sanctioning, right? And for you to have sanctioning, for you to have that sanctioning, well, that also means you're being insured by USATF, right? So if anything happens to your event and the insurance is going through USATF, well, they're essentially liable, right? And so there has to be some safeguards in place when, the repercussions of an event don't fall on you, right? And so I think it's a tough position to be in, because some of those things that have to be done for meets to happen and be sanctioned and have that insurance are hard, are challenging. There's a lot of logistics, there's costs. So it has not been easy for people to figure out. But obviously some people are, and unfortunately for fans, it's coming at a very short notice and after the fact in some cases. But it's I think everyone, I've heard this in so many different spaces outside of just even planning a sports event. It's a wild, wild west right now, and everyone's trying to figure it out while they go. You're trying to do what you think is best. You're also trying to cover your butt. So it's really, it's a challenging time. So, Kyle, I wanted to go ahead.
I was just going to say, we're time trialing next week, and it's not a sanctioned race or anything. And we haven't publicized it. We haven't told anyone the day or where it is or anything, because we just don't even want friends or family necessarily to come watch or cheer us on or anything. Like when Johnny did the Blue Jeans Mile, we kept a lot of people who were like very interested in coming in the dark, because you just didn't want. So it's a last second thing. So I totally understand why people are, keeping the cards close to their chest.
It wasn't publicized until just this moment. Breaking news here on Beneath the Grandstand.
Yeah. We'll see. It's not a sanctioned USATF race. I'll tell you that. So no world or American record will be broken. Is that correct? I guess. Yeah. I mean, it might just become a more confusing situation than the American Collegiate record debate when I run 12:20 in a 5K. There was an 18.91 second 200 08 not 200 run. So,
Yeah. Make sure it's meters, not yards.
Yeah. That was it was a great 3 seconds before you thought about it. You're like, oh my God. It's unbelievable. Yeah. So what did you guys think of the inspiration games? Did you enjoy the split screens?
I haven't fully watched it yet, but I do know some of the logistics that went into it. It was a challenging event, but it was, people are trying to figure it out, and they're trying to bring track and field to fans. I think that's what I think is a great thing to see right now, and how do we make that happen? I don't think, if I'm not mistaken, I don't think it was maybe shown live today or quote unquote live, but I think a lot of it was maybe pre-recorded, and probably synced up and post-produced, and results were put out today from what I've heard. So
yeah,
not an easy undertaking. Concept.
Yeah, I mean, the Ingebrigtsen versus Kenya.
Yep.
That was cool.
So,
it is interesting that go ahead.
No, go ahead, Alex.
It's interesting that we're in this weird, because sports we're trying to get really creative right now, right? Like, it's not an ideal situation, but you're seeing it across the board, like, and like for us, like Ryan and I from the media side and the broadcasting side, like, it's been this cool kind of moment though to like dip your toes into new projects, right? And like literally anything and everything is on the table at this point as far as broadcasting, right? And fan interaction. So it's been this really and I think we'll see it even more with like the MLB and the NBA and like the MLS. Like, we're seeing this like weird kind of like fan interaction like perspective. So it's like, this could actually bring us new innovations into the way we broadcast sports, right? And it's like, maybe it'll change our whole perspective on like what track really needs to be, right? It's like the Impossible Games happened in multiple different areas, right? So like, because so often we get kind of bunkered down by, we don't have enough meets, there's not enough venues, like the schedule is busted, and like, you can't have a 10K at night and the sprint, like, so it's like, okay, so we've proven that we can break this thing up. We don't have to have a giant 4-hour-long event for everybody to sit in the hot sun and watch, 3 to 4 heats of 10K to get through. Like, is this just what track and field needs actually to change our perspective on event presentation?
Ryan, you're the expert on meet presentation. I mean, what are you learning?
No.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. So we, at Flow Sports, we sit across 25 plus sports, and most sports are not back on, right? But there are some that are back on. We're pretty big in some motorsports and some dirt track car racing. That has come back in a pretty significant way. And obviously social distancing in a car is probably different than, people running on a track next to each other. I can't speak to how their protocol and what they're doing and fans in the stands or not in the stands, but we've seen events go off in wrestling and grappling where it's just 2 people on a mat, right? And the conditions are a little more controlled. In those scenarios, the thing that is different than running is that the sport is still the sport, right? Wrestling, whether you're in a pandemic or not, whether there's fans in the stands or not, it's still 2 men or women, and their wrestling technique is technique, and they're competing, right? Racetrack in a car, you're racing around a track, right? Track and field is the challenge right now is trying to figure something out and do it in a way that is captivating for an audience, right? And also, like we were talking about, you're trying to meet safety expectations and protocol, and you're also trying to make an actual race, right? Time trialing is cool. and that is exciting, especially if people are going after it. I mean, some of the stuff that the Bowerman folks were doing, watching Brazier run 335, that was pretty cool. But it's challenging because everyone is trying to figure out their own thing right now, and no one's able to actually promote or market or speak about what they're doing until almost after the fact. And so I know there's a ton of effort going in. In some cases there's some significant financials that have to go into figuring this stuff out. And the challenge is are people actually getting to enjoy the fruits of all this labor and trying to figure out these kind of one-off scenarios that in reality, when the sport hopefully comes back to normal, are all these, there's some learnings that we'll get, like Alex is talking about, I think, and how can we be creative and do things. But, also the question is, does the sport significantly change its format because of is that actually a good thing if it does,
Yeah. I
think
that if I could hope that one thing is kind of taken away from this whole thing, and it's something that I think a lot of people already knew, but it's something that we're seeing even more, is that fans want to know the behind the scenes. They want to know what led up to the performance. And obviously, tremendously impressive performances are something that we're always going to value and really, really be entertained by. But just as much so, it's like the mental games that are happening every single day, and the ups and downs of training, and the goal setting, and the everything that is just very human in the sport that allows you to connect with the individuals. Therefore, you become more invested in their success or failure. And I think a lot of that responsibility falls on the individual to bring fans along with them. And just simply showing up on a track and running fast, unless it's a world-beating time, it's just not that exciting. We need to kind of see what led up to that. Something that I made up is that it's not, it's the journey, it's not the destination. I said that first. You may have heard it elsewhere.
You just made that up.
Never heard that. Never heard that.
Yeah. So feel free to quote me moving forward.
No, I think it's a good point. I think in all that's happening, and with these one-off things, if there's a way to tie in more around that behind the scenes, we've seen that for years. I think Alex and I, over our years working together, that was a big push and initiative on our side, was trying to bring those stories out from behind what's going on the track, and how people are getting there. And I think, to your point, now is a very, very interesting time to see what's behind the curtain, and how people are handling getting through this time.
Well, those are the storylines that I think really sell and that make people interested. Today, watching Allison Felix race again, and knowing what her last couple of years have looked like, and the push forward that she's trying to make for being a mother in the sport, or Gwen Berry and her Black Lives Matter activism, and standing up and speaking out against, what is right and what is wrong, and things like that. It's now I can't wait to see you compete. Now you have fans, because we can connect with you as people, and you gave us a reason to root for you. And I knew you were good. I was aware of the fact that both Allison and Gwen were great athletes, but now I want to see them succeed more than ever. And that's something that we need to keep encouraging people moving forward to do, and make an active part of what their personal brand is.
Yeah, and we talk about personal brand. Right now it's we're more reliant on athletes to be aware of that and create their own brand, right? Because there's no flow or production crew that can come out there and film something, right? It's now like we're relying on athletes even more than ever to tell that story, right? Kyle, I'd like to take it back a little bit and talk about, you know, the 2020 season, right? And so we're talking about some of these one-off events, and they're cool and they're fun, and I'm glad we're making them happen. But like, as an athlete, what is the feedback you've heard from USATF or from your teammates or your agents as in regards to, will there be sanctioned meets from USATF this year? Like, will there be a USATF championship? Or are we at a place where we need to officially say a championship's not happening this year? Bag it and let's move on.
Yeah, without getting into like too many specifics, because I don't know what's public and what's not official yet, but I know that there's definitely a lot of talk about some individual meets that are happening in August to have official USATF sanctioned meets, especially now that the window for the Olympic trials is open, which initially it wasn't, but the athletes pushed back and USATF listened and heard and said, all right, like if you run a qualifying time, it counts. And so now there are going to be some opportunities, I think, for athletes that are going to pop up. And I know that there's talk of a potential USA championship-esque meet in September, but a decision on that is going to have to be made pretty soon. And, you know, I think it's tough because just no one really knows anything definitive about what's happening. And the worst thing you can do is tell people, yes, something is definitely going to happen, and then kind of pull the rug out from underneath them. So it's a lot of uncertainty, and you just have to be kind of focused on the process right now and just be fit. And I think a big part of fitness is that you can get race ready in just a couple weeks. I think most, you know, at least distance runners can be in pretty decent shape and then really back off and turn on the jets a bit in a matter of 2-3 weeks. So that's kind of what I think most of my teammates are trying to do, is you tell us when to be ready and just give us a little bit of notice and we'll be there.
Kyle, I wonder, so, you know, we've seen the pullout of, you know, the Olympics didn't happen, right? They were going to be in late summer. Pre's canceled, was rescheduled to be in late summer. How are we even having the discussion that we could still have a meet in September? Like, we've justified not having two major track moments. How can we justify having this other one?
I think I'm not confident it's going to happen. I think a few weeks ago, the numbers were trending in the right direction and people were probably a little bit more optimistic, and just the way things have kind of turned in, you know, parts of the country now, I don't think you could reasonably have everyone travel. And that's like the biggest issue, is the travel, in my opinion. You know, it's one thing to stay on your local track and do a race. It's another to get 50 different states, getting on planes and descending onto one small town in the middle of the country. So, yeah, I mean, you can understand why people are trying, because they care about the sport and competition and the athletes. But I think ultimately, I'm not personally that optimistic that anything major is going to happen. I think we'll see some one-off races though.
Everything's still very, very touch and go. I mean, that's the challenging thing right now with any planning, and folks that are in the event planning world, is that you can plan for as much as you want right now, and safeguards and testing and whatever it might be, and then and things can change on a day's notice depending on the state you're in and the local situation. So that's the biggest challenge right now is, you know, even when markers are on the calendar, every marker, there's that caveat. We're going to have this meet, we hope.
Yeah. And I know for me personally, like we're taking a good look at the Long Island Mile right now. And, you know, for us, if we can't have all the fans there, we're not sure it's worth putting on. Like, that's why we do it, is to be able to have tons of high school kids running around on the infield and inspiring them for their cross country season. So, I mean, if that becomes impossible for us to do, then I don't know if we're going to have the meet, and we're just we're trying to push it off as long as possible because we know we can throw it together really quick if things start looking good and the numbers are where we want them to be. But it's I think it just, you have to prepare for everything right now.
That's interesting perspective because you kind of have that meet director hat for part of for that event each year, and so for some event directors going through this, they're trying to figure out, all right, we want to do some track and field and want to broadcast it so fans could see it. We want to have track and field meet because we want to give athletes an opportunity. For you, it's actually completely different. You will specifically do it for the fans, where a lot of people are like, hey, we don't need fans in the stand. For you guys, it's all about touching the local community there and having an impact and them being at the event. Can you kind of talk about how, that motive, and then how you guys are trying to figure out what you can do and how long you'll push off until you figure it out?
Yeah, I mean, that's really the motivation for us, is to inspire the community. And if the community isn't there, the community event doesn't necessarily exist. So, regulations in New York are loosening right now. I think we're entering phase 4. We just entered phase 4. And so maybe there's a level of hope for us there, but we're not going to do it if it's, not safe for everyone to come. But it's great that there are meets out there and there are meet directors whose mission is just to help the athletes to get an opportunity to run fast times. And I know those people are working really hard right now, jumping through a ton of hoops to hopefully make that happen.
How long will you guys wait until you're able to make a call, like a definitive? And maybe the question is, how long do you wait until you have to say, hey, it's not going to happen this year?
Yeah, maybe the end of the month. I think we could throw a version of it together in a month's time. So we'll see. But yeah, we've obviously had the discussion of going virtual or, trying to do some other creative things. But I think that's one thing about our sport that we've seen, and it's just it's the atmosphere that gets people excited.
Yeah, if we can't have that moment of that shot of the straightaway where everybody's lining the track, I think we really, and it's a bummer too, because there has been some really great, like the Long Island Mile, that has been a really great resurgence in our sport. And I think if we lose that little bump that we've been getting, and that moment of people coming down to the trackside, that image is so powerful. And I think it's really powerful to people who don't know track, right? People who don't know track, who can literally viscerally feel that moment when people are on the track and someone's coming through the tape. So I think it's important to, it's important to keep those moving, even for the high school inspiration too. I guess if there's no high school cross country season, you can't inspire those kids either. And I wonder, what have you heard from those kids? How can we justify having high school sports if we just started canceling collegiate conference sports?
Yeah, I wonder if there's just going to be a huge gap in cross country and track talent at some point for these couple of years. Is there going to be oh yeah, everyone who graduates in the year 2022, they're just not that good because they didn't run track for a couple of years. It's just, or is there the participation numbers of certain classes just going to be way down? The kids who are maybe supposed to go into high school this fall and get into cross country and track, and then they don't do that. What does that look like, and long-term implications? Also, what sports do kids play? I guess playing devil's advocate, maybe parents determine, it's way safer for you to run track than football. So,
totally.
Or cross country than football. So maybe we do see a shift of people who are that's the socially distant sport to play. It's safer. So We'll see.
I think
no one knows.
I think the biggest impact if we don't have an Olympics, I think that's when we would see a legit effect, right? So if we can't have an Olympics in 2021, that moment of track and field being on the stage, how much will that hurt our sport, right? And I think,
Yeah.
especially as we start this lead up to 2028 in LA Olympics, in 8 years, like we need to be putting building blocks down. So that is like the greatest moment for our sport that we've seen in a long time. And I think having 1 year off of the Olympics is going to really hurt track, and it's going to really hurt swimming and gymnastics. And let's all hold hands and pray that doesn't happen.
Well, even from a financial perspective, it's going to be super interesting for shoe companies and various sponsors, because if you're not sure that the Olympics is even happening, or if there's going to be a U.S. championship, are you signing athletes? I mean, out of the current college class, we've only seen a couple athletes get signed. And so, obviously the economic impact of the pandemic is a very real thing. But also it's just like, maybe you're not going to get the same return on value if there's no races. So what does that mean for the long-term growth of the sport at a professional level?
Are you threatened? Go ahead.
Yeah, I think
say,
we
Kyle,
might have had the same question.
Is that on your mind? I mean, as an athlete who is like, the pinnacle of your contract, we could say, or, a third party's perspective on your contract might be like, hey, can this guy be in the Olympics? Are we going to be in the Olympics? And if that moment is taken away, like, how threatening is that to somebody whose professional life revolves around that moment?
Yeah, no, I mean, pretty threatening. Do you know anything by chance? Like, it's like an interesting situation for everyone. It's not just me, obviously. And like my personal situation aside, it's just, in general, the majority of contracts kind of go until Olympic years. So I think that there's a lot of people that are kind of just sitting around wondering what's going to happen. Now, the one thing I have heard is that because no one's making the Olympic team, shoe companies are going to save a lot of money by not having to pay out bonuses. And so for that reason, it's, maybe it just things get pushed down another year and it's okay. But I could see a lot of difference from one company to the next of what people are going to do and how they approach it and how their individual company was maybe affected by the pandemic economically.
So with the athletes you're talking to, Kyle, I mean, this is interesting on the sponsorship side, because we've had a few of these conversations on the show about sponsorship. We've had some folks from shoe companies on and asked these questions. Do you feel from the athletes you're speaking with that most, if they're in a situation where 2020 is kind of the year their contract went through, are they just kind of sitting and hoping there's an extension through 21, or are people being proactive and trying to have those conversations, or are they just more like, I don't want to raise my hand because hopefully they're just going to forget about it and go to the next year? Like,
I think you see a huge combination of both, because some people, I think the thing that a lot of people would maybe be trying to do is just, hey, as soon as that opportunity presents itself in August, September, October, maybe at a BU meet in December, that it's like, I'm going to have to be on and prove myself and show that I didn't waste any fitness. Like, I built myself up during this. I wasn't just sitting around on the couch waiting for whatever, like I was training. So, yeah, I mean, I think everyone's initial reaction was really telling and interesting, where you had some people who immediately were like, all right, well, we're just going to proceed with our normal spring season and we're going to do time trials and we're going to pretend as if nothing's ever really happened. You have other people who are just like, I include myself in this, where I was just like, I'm just going to run a ton and see what happens. And when there's races, I'll jump in them. And then you have some people who, immediately, we had some teammates who immediately took a few weeks off and were like, mentally needed a break, and it was stressful, obviously. And so everyone had different reactions. Everyone continues to have different reactions because no one has answers.
Are people having the conversation with their shoe company sponsors about, hey, what does this mean for my kind of my livelihood and our contract? Or are people just waiting to see what this year looks like?
From what I understand is most people are just, waiting and just doing their job right now as best as they can, and I think that's where social media and YouTube and Strava and the things that you can do beyond just racing kind of come into play to prove your worth and show that you're more than just a time on a paper.
So this is my personal view, and I'll throw it out there as a recommendation to athletes out there. If you have a contract that is expiring at the end of this year and you're sitting and waiting, I would say go talk to your agent and say, what can we be doing now to communicate with our brand to know that my association with them is important and meaningful? Because you're out of sight, you're out of mind. So are the budgets right now. And when things come back around and 2021, there's a lot of decisions to be made. Relationships are huge, right? You guys have contracts that state the terms of your agreement, right? And what part of that is the end date of that agreement. And so this is, again, recommendation, have a relationship, good relationship. I know most athletes do, but don't leave it to chance and hope. Put it in your own hands and figure out what you can do now to have those conversations, and know that, let the people know that are making the decisions about your financial wellness. Make sure they know that this is important to you, and the relationship you have with the brand is important. I mean, Alex, you came from
it's a
the
great
brand
opportunity.
side.
Yeah. I mean, I think from the brand side, you have to remember, like, you know, when I was in the sports marketing chair, like, I had to, you know, we still had to, the budget still came down from above, right? So not only are athletes and agents stating their case to the sports marketing folks, right? The sports marketing folks have to up channel budget, right? And they're begging for those marketing dollars. So you need to give them the tools for them to be able to justify up why we need these athletes, right? Why we need to, you know, re-up their contract or justify hanging on to them. Because, you know, when we start talking about bonuses, like, you know, there was probably in the Olympic marketing budget, they try to allocate for a little bit of wiggle room if they need to, like, give out some bonuses, right? But that was this year, guys. That was this year, and this year for most shoe companies was not great. So we can't just assume that those marketing dollars are just going to be handed over to 2021, because those dollars don't exist anymore, right? So you need to really be able to, like, showcase and give the brands the opportunity to market you up, to justify keeping on for another few years. And I think it just gives it, like, make sure you are seeing it from their perspective too, because it's a long funnel. And I'll be straight up, like, track and field, for most brands, track and field's at the bottom, right? For Hoka, it's probably it's different, but, like, if you're somebody at Adidas or Nike, right? You're like, you're shouting from the rooftops, like, you're begging for every ounce, every dollar you can possibly get. So make sure the brand can make you visible and make you valued, and make it easy to share with their bosses too.
And don't forget that we're not out of the pandemic yet, right? I'm based in Texas. We're going through a second wave of shutdown to some extent. If that happens in other areas and other places, and this continues, the strain on budget will only get more significant, right? And so that's where I say be proactive, right? Because you don't want to get to a point where we are in a dire situation with things like marketing budgets, which those have already been affected, and then it's too late, right? Like, then because at the end of the contract, and Alex, you can probably speak to this, that's when everyone's coming to ask for something, right? And at that point, a lot of times it's too late. And so, again, this is coming from someone, Alex's side, that from the brand perspective, and someone that deals on the partnership side, and it's always I would err on the side of having too good of a relationship than kind of sitting back and just hoping what you've done speaks for itself.
Yeah, I think it's such a good opportunity for athletes to just diversify themselves as individuals and become more than the numbers. And that's where, it's your opportunity to shine. And I think right now in general in the industry, and maybe Alex, you could speak to this, but I think right now the performance incentives are a little bit antiquated, where it's, what's more valuable to a shoe company, a sixth place finish in a Diamond League race in Europe that no one watched, or having 100,000 followers on TikTok? Like, what's going to sell more shoes? And I think right now contracts don't really reflect that value.
I think that's totally fair, right? And I think, in 2020, I think people more understand more clearly, like, the value of not just followers. This is one insight I'll share with as many athletes as I possibly can. Your value is not necessarily your followers, right? It's the engagement around it, right? And that is something that brands are diving more and more into. Even, and agencies will say this too, like advertising agencies, media agencies. They want to see engagement. They want to see the tail behind your content, right? So yeah, it's cool to have a lot of followers, but, like, how are you feeding it, right? Are you engaging with them underneath your comments and, like, creating, like, little ecosystems around your content? Because that's more value than a big fat follower number. So please keep that in mind when you're posting, right? But also, you're totally right, Kyle. Like, it used to be super hard to articulate to people above me, like, why somebody's valuable, right? You only have a small moment of their time to justify your track and field budget, and it's really easy for them to understand this person is a gold medalist, this person broke the American record, right? This person is an NCAA champ, and they go, cool, sounds great, sign off on that, right? But I think in 2020, people are getting a little more nuanced, and they understand the value of presence. And I think, Kyle, like, to be fair, like, you're a spectacular example of somebody who is creating ecosystems and digital communities around your identity, right? And like, that's totally honest, right? I think people should lean on, get some insights from you. And I think, like we talked about earlier, that it's in the journey, right? And I think we know as it really is, though. But the story is, the content that people really want to see is in the journey, right? And so right now it's up to athletes specifically to showcase that journey. And you need to be doing it now, because no one's coming out to film you.
That's why I started this podcast. And I think you guys are going. What did I call it again? Beneath the something.
Beneath the Grandstand.
Yeah, that's it. I'm so happy to have started this.
Beneath the bookshelf. Yeah.
Well, I think, Kyle, that may be a good conversation for round 2 of your podcast. Is really, we could dig into that social media game and how that all started. So, but I know we've got you for quite a bit of time here, and we appreciate it. There's a lot of things we covered here, from Ivy League to meets to what USATF will do, to obviously your own meet and wearing that meet director hat, and now what athletes can do to help their situation as we get through this time. So really appreciate your insight and thoughts around it. And last question I have for you is, what's the over under for the time trial, and also what's the distance for this time trial coming up now that it's out into the world?
Yeah. All right, so we're doing a 5K. It's me, Johnny, and Travis. I think it's going to be just the 3 of us. And I joke that I just want a positive experience. I did my last 5K I ran was in 2017, and that was a negative experience overall. The last mile was some serious pain and not fun at all. If I could. I don't know. We got thunderstorm for 5 days. I have a million excuses I could give, but
I hear them. They're like just waiting to come out.
I would like to break 13:40 closing really well, And then in August, I would like to get into a regular race somewhere and really get after it a bit. So
and for
this is
people to
just,
know,
let's get some positive momentum.
13:55 is the current PR, and you said that was a painful
Yeah.
race, so you want to feel good.
I'm not proud of that race by any means. So yeah, I want to close well and then walk away and be like, when I get in one of these other races that are being discussed about August, to really get after something. But this is my stepping stone, because right now my relationship with the 5K is still a little sour.
This is good. Yeah, the miler can really form a bond during the pandemic with his 5,000 meter friend. So, and will there be any pacers?
We'll see. I think we're going to have a pacer. I don't think it's USATF sanctioned a race. It's like at a random all-comers meet sort of thing. So I'm not sure if the time will even. I don't know if it's going to get posted. Who knows? But we're just going to have some fun, and if it goes well, you'll hear about it. And if it doesn't go well, then it got canceled.
Well,
I'm not one for trash talk. I don't.
Well, we appreciate you breaking the news here on the show. So we'll make sure people are really pumped and excited and digging deep to find these results. Yeah. So, but Kyle, thank you so much for joining us today, and we wish you guys all the best on the time trial and the training, and hope everyone stays healthy and safe up there.
Yeah, let's. I hear it's going to be windy, but I don't know. So I appreciate it.
Oh my God.
I don't know. I have a feeling my breakfast isn't going to sit that well. You don't know. But thank you.
This is going back. This is how we inspire the young kids. Is just like make sure they know all the excuses that they can have before the race, and then just have them ready to roll. And if it goes well, everything was perfect. So it's.
Well, it would be despite everything.
Right.
Despite the stomachache and the windy conditions. All right, Kyle. We'll look out for it. Good luck. Have fun in that 5K. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Appreciate you guys.
Alex, it's a little weird to not have the host of the show on the outro. You know, Merber left us, and I guess we have to do his work for him. But no, it was fun. A fun show. Always great to talk to Kyle, and you know, I think his insights from the Ivy League perspective, just as an Ivy League alum and at Columbia, it was interesting, and just talking through really what this decision means for kids in the Ivy League and what decisions they would make. He threw the question at us, and I kind of took the perspective of a Clemson, public school university student athlete. So I didn't even really get to answer his question, because it seems like they have a few other variables to navigate more than I would have at a public institution. And so figuring out how to navigate the 5th year opportunity and what you need to do, and do you enroll or not enroll and take the gap year. So it's significant decisions, and financially significant for families, like Kyle was saying, to understand, are we going to pay for a year of school for online classes? So it's
right.
It's a tough decision for kids to be in, and with the Ivy League decision, kids outside the Ivy League have to be in a really kind of scared place right now, because you're like, all right, here's the first conference to make the call. Like, what's our conference going to do? And you're just kind of sitting on the edge of the seat waiting at this point.
Yeah. I think it was funny when he said, you're not paying for the slides, right? You're paying for the experience, and like the exchange of the exchange of ideas between people from coming all over the world, like really intelligent people from coming all over the world. That's the Ivy League experience you're paying for, right? So yeah, I thought that was really interesting perspective when you look at it from a parent lens. And I think when I asked them, like, why has the Ivy League been at the forefront of making decisions before other conferences, he took the perspective that it's not like a specific data point that puts the red flag up for them. It's like, no, it's just the optics, and that people in the Ivy Leagues are pretty progressive, relatively liberal, and tend to be more like cautious around this whole pandemic perspective. So, which is really interesting, and because obviously they don't rely on football or basketball, right? And so it's like they're not needing football and basketball season to happen. And so I think that's an interesting insight, that it's really not like like they're looking at coronavirus data every day and monitoring that. It's an optics thing, right? And I think some other conferences, there's only a couple, but like you could see them, if they don't need football, like how can you justify really having a season at this point, especially if kids are not on campus? On the other, kind of the flip side of our conversation with Kyle, when he put the meet director hat on, I thought that was really interesting. Because Kyle is an athlete, and he himself can financially, like, he benefits from being able to show his fitness and performing, right? But on the same hand, he's an event director who has an honest perspective on, hey, is this actually safe to make happen? So he's on both the fence, and so that's why, and that's one of the reasons we wanted to bring him on, because he has such an interesting perspective on it.
Yeah. No, I mean, on the meat front, with everything he's going through and all meat directors going through at points in the show today, we were kind of going back and forth on what ifs and what does this look like, and kind of spitballing a little bit. And I think it all just points back to the fact that no one knows what's going to happen. We're still in such a gray area in so many aspects of our worlds, right? Within sport, outside of sport. And so planning something that's outside of your day-to-day of waking up, going to work remotely, need to go to the grocery store and pick up some things. I'm going to go for a run today, or whatever it might be. When you start getting outside of that world right now, things get a lot more hairy and a lot more gray and a lot more, maybe we can do that. And the further out on the calendar you get, the more gray it gets. And so it just was it's a reminder that no one really knows yet, even people at the highest level, right? You can make a decision, and every decision made right now, there is that asterisk on if things continue going in a positive direction, if the pandemic starts settling down, right? And so only time will tell on a lot of these things. So the last thing, I think that we talked about that I get excited about for athletes, and maybe excited is not the word, kind of passionate, in that, you're dealing with your careers, and if your contract is up or your financial stability is on the line this year, don't wait and say, hopefully they'll remember me, or hopefully they're just going to extend it because the games got canceled, or, I ran really well last year and that should carry over. Whatever the justification is for you to not stand up right now and figure out what you can be doing. Maybe you're killing the game on social media, right? Great. Have the conversation. Talk to your agent, set up a meeting with your sponsor. Don't leave it to chance and think every decision that's being made right now. I think you said it the best, Alex. A lot of the people that you're communicating with as an athlete to your marketing departments at these shoe companies, they have to fight for their budget, and they're going to fight for what they believe in. And a lot of times what they believe in is the relationships that you form with them. So don't leave it to chance.
100%. Always keep that in mind. And Ryan, I think the pandemic and the year that we're in, we talk about this, like the sustainability for athletes. I think this shows even more that we need to allow non-endemic sponsors to have a better presence in this sport, right? So because we can't be always relying on sponsors that only see value through results, right? And I think if we can find brands that aren't maybe so ingrained in performance, I think we need to make that happen to make our sport healthier. And I think it creates better opportunities for all athletes who are in that kind of cusp, just barely getting by. We need non-endemic brands be able to come in and see the value of sponsoring athletes. But if we're gonna keep boxing them out of the major meets, like how do those small brands justify, some of these athletes? So I think, it's no one's fault, right? Like no one knows the future, and we're not blaming anyone for, pushing meets, not scheduling meets. It's just we're here to put all the conversations on the table, right? And I think we just we need to keep doing that and putting the most progressive ideas out there, and like let's have an honest conversation about them, and that's what we're trying to do here on Beneath the Grandstand. Today was a little beneath the bookshelf with Kyle Merber, so we appreciate you guys joining us. Please like and subscribe, and if you think that there is a person we really need to have on the pod, reach out to us. We want to hear about it. So thanks for joining us again today, guys, and we'll see you next time beneath the Grandstand.